Good afternoon, my next gen millionaires. How are you all doing today? Um, and lighting here sucks. Sorry. It's always like you go to live stream, there's like all this crazy stuff. But, um, anyways, so I want to come to you this fine Friday afternoon, and I want to talk about some things that have been near and dear to my heart. Like I was going to live stream a couple days ago, and just be honest, like with my process. What did you see? Because you'll notice I live stream in here about once a week. And that's the goal. I want to just like give you little bits and tips of like the deeper level conversation. Right, you've downloaded the attitudes of money, and now it's like okay, so what's like the little bits and pieces around like each of the attitudes and which ones are more important? Which none of them are. The one that's most important is always the one that you need most, right? But I try to get in here once a week live stream and just give you a little bit more. And been sitting on the topic that I want to talk about this week, and I had like everything laid out, and like I was going to do that, and I talked to Debbie about it. And I'm like, hey, does this sound good? Because I like to bounce ideas off on my like external processor. Um, and then I went to live stream, and I totally forgot what it was about. I'm like, oh man. So um, we're going to do something different. It's still going to be on the same attitude that we're going to talk about this week because it's an attitude that's really near and dear to my heart. A lot of people get it wrong. A lot of people like I hear people talk about it a lot, right? But there's not a lot of material out there to learn about it, which I find very fascinating, right? And that attitude is the attitude of boundaries. Um, like if you talk to therapists and stuff, they like learn about it during their schooling, right? But again, there's not a lot of really good books out there about it. Like, how do you learn more about like how to set up boundaries? Because guess what? From I know my experience and like most of my clients and most people I talk to, like nobody really taught us to like what boundaries were growing up, right? The one thing I always remember, and I see parents do it all the time, and I'm like, oh, if you don't understand what you're teaching your children, you understand you're trying to teach your children to be like good, right? Good and like socially aware people and whatnot. But um, here's the piece, right? Because you always say like you have these play dates, the kids come over and they gotta share their toys, right? Share all their stuff with these other kids. And it's like they don't have a choice whether they want to share or not, right? From the very like start of our lives, as parents, as adults, we continue to tell children they must share, right? Why do they have to share? Like, have you ever asked yourself, why do you encourage children to share? And I would love to know in the comments, like for any of the moms in here, right, or dads, or anybody who parents who has kids, because we don't have kids, so I'm like, I don't know if I'd do that. I have interact with nieces and nephews. My mindset's a lot different now, so I'm like, I mean, I want to share with people around me. Like I understand as an adult, I want to share, but as children, right? As children, why do we force them to share everything they have? I just wanted to put it out there for a moment, right? Because we teach them very young to be like, oh, you have to share your toys, or you have to share your food with your siblings, or you got to share that, or you got to share your room, or like, I don't know, if they're playing with crayons, it's like they can't have like their own little bucket of crayons. They gotta like share. And I understand like you only want one as a doll that makes total sense to me. It's like you buy a box of crayons or like a Lego, like a bucket of Legos, right? And you're like, hey, you gotta share, so everybody can play and have fun. And we're teaching collaboration and all that fun stuff. But at the same time, there's an underlying element of boundaries that we continue to teach our children that is not okay to hold. And it can go way deeper. We're going to leave it kind of at that level for today. But we teach them that it's not okay for them to say no. And that whatever mom and dad want, or whoever the adult or authority figure is in that case, right, that they're the ones who get the final say. And that doesn't really matter to them. And then we grow up into adults and we get walked all over. We get, taken advantage of. We do things we don't want to do, right? We stay in relationships that we don't want to stay in. We have friendships with people that we can't stand, right? We have a hard time understanding that when we communicate, we can't hold a line because we just have to kind of make sure everybody feels warm and fuzzy at the end of the conversation. Hence the reason why we don't talk about money, we don't talk about religion, we don't talk about politics at the family dinner table. And those are like the three taboo subjects we don't usually talk about, right? And in this day and age where we're at right now, history might start coming up in there too, because there's a lot in history that we've been excluded from, right, through our teachings through school and whatnot. And as people are understanding with the age of the internet, right, and this age of information, that people are starting to be like, why, what? I know as a white person, like a lot of the Black history has been like completely basically erased from American history. Like, I didn't learn about any of that in school. Right now I'm learning about it, but we still don't want to talk about it. We're afraid about like how other people are going to feel, and we hold that pressure on us, right? We're like holding this pressure of like, oh, how are they going to feel? I don't know, but I have to interact with them, and I have to share like that same concept of sharing, but I have to be in a space where nobody's feelings can get hurt. And as adults, and as we're dealing with this, and as we move through, right, and everybody in this group, these you next gen millionaires have a different way of thinking. And you're moving through life, and you're like, wait a minute, I can say that I don't like that. I can say no to people. I can be like, I don't want to share. And that's totally cool, right? Because what happens is we're taught a program, right? And that program becomes the boundary. Well, what happens is that program doesn't necessarily align with who we are and what we stand for, but it's what was taught to us. And you know, our brains are like awesome computers, and that program goes in, but we never challenge the program. So now we start going through life, and we're like, well, I have to do this. And then someone's going to challenge us and say, why? And you feel this kind of dissonance inside of you, being like, I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. Right? That's a good time to look at kind of, there's a boundary that you want to have that's being violated. So what happens? I'll tell you what happens. You can probably look back through your lives and think, oh, yep, I see this happen a lot. Is you go through, and once you pass the boundary, right? Say you set a boundary here. Once you pass this boundary and you start going further and further away from the boundary on the other side of where you don't want it to be, that's when we start tolerating things, right? And I'm sure you can all look in your lives and be like, hey, if I ask the questions, what are you tolerating? Just thinking overall, like, what am I tolerating? What am I putting up with that I don't want to put up with anymore? That's toleration. It can happen in relationships. It can happen, well, I mean, we're talking relationships here, so we'll stay, it can happen in relationships. You know, and like it can happen with family members, friends, in the workplace, right? It can happen in religious places, political places, wherever it is. If you look at it from like those tolerations that are happening within relationships that you have, right? I want to point out one too. It could be happening with your relationship with money. There's tolerations because you could be angry to be like, hey, why aren't you showing up? I do all this stuff, and then there's this distance between I do this boundary, but then because of the money, I continue to say yes. And then we get angry about it. We're like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. Then we get all grumpy. And here's the thing. At the end of that toleration zone, there's no set amount for anybody, but we all have limits. We'll get to the end of that limit, and then that's when we want to burn it all down. That's when we want to just be like, I'm done with this. And that's usually when we have the explosions with other people, where we quit our jobs, whether we just like want to just like blow a bunch of money, whatever. There's a reaction that happens at the end, right? Literally a reaction, like an explosion, right? Like a nuclear reactor, just boom, because we're tired of it. We're so far past the boundary where we want to be, and into that toleration zone, because that's what we were taught. I get back to the example of children I used in the beginning. We were taught to hold a certain boundary. And we, on the inside, wanted to hold said boundary, but then we got told by authority figures in our lives that that was not good, and that we had to break that. And so then we enter this toleration zone. And that's where we've been taught to live. And then we blow up at people, and we come back. And it's like this dance across that blow-up line. Like we have these boundaries over here in the toleration zone, there's the zone, and we like to dance on this line over here instead of coming back here. Well, guess what? We can go back to the boundary. It pisses a lot of people off. We don't got to be angry or grumpy with people about it, but we can set clear boundaries with what we want, are within our values. And as we do that, we'll become more aligned with ourselves. More money will flow into our lives because we'll pick up jobs that we want to do. We'll work with clients that we want to work with. And we'll stop doing things that are so far out of alignment that we're doing it because we're taught to be nice. We're taught to tolerate. versus really standing up and creating our own set of rules, those being boundaries, and say what you will or won't do. Okay? Here's what I want to leave you today. Really what it comes down to is I want you to think, what are you tolerating? And where's the real boundary? Where do you want that boundary to be? Because when we set the boundary, right, that could be like, every time I interact with my mom, right, here's some good examples of me. My mom would always like push against what I was doing. And even as, like, I'm 41 years old and she still asks me sometimes when I'm going to get a real job, a quote, quote, unquote, real job, right, meaning a corporate job. I'm like, what? Like, in the beginning, like, there's a lot of things I push against, right? And I'd be like, oh yeah, mom. But now I'm like, I'm more vocal about it. So it's like I tolerated her kind of these little jabs here and there over and over a lot. And it didn't feel good. But I was like, oh, it's my mom. I gotta love her, blah, 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 right? But I was tolerating that feedback, right, that she was giving me and that kind of underhanded underminedness. Now I love my mom, right? I don't want to paint this picture. She's an evil woman. But she pushes against it. Well, my boundary now is like, no, she don't get to come in that space. She doesn't get to come in my space and tell me that what I do is not real. So I push back and be like, oh, we had a great month. Like, I'll push back and be like, no, why do I need a real job? In your world, real job, right? And a lot of us as entrepreneurs, right, feel that from family, right? So that could be a boundary. Just to give you an example, but look for it in your life. Where are you feeling that dissonance inside between what you're doing and what you want to do? Okay? That's a great place to start because it's going to tell you where you're in the toleration zone. And at the end of the toleration zone is a blow up. That's usually where we see people make major changes in their lives because they're like, can't do it. And so then you go the opposite way, right? You go so far the other way that it feels like you whiplash to some people. So if we start to catch these now and start to catch the little tolerations that you're living in, right, where you've crossed your boundaries, then you can bring yourself back and set the boundary and it doesn't feel such like whiplash for other people, nor will it feel like whiplash to you, right? There's a lot of relationships we have in life and it's just like managing and kind of navigating what's going on. I know there's a lot of tolerating other people right now based upon the worldviews you might have versus what those of your family. With the Black Lives Matters movement, sorry. There's a lot of people. I've had people unfriend me, right? I've had people who were on my mailing list, right, that I've interacted with who have been clients of mine. They're like, I'm out. I'm cool with that. Like, that's my boundary. I'm like, I believe in the movement, right? I believe in humanity growing together, and there's a very niche part of humanity who's not feeling loved and hasn't felt loved for a really long time. So stand with them. Right, that's my stance. So it's a boundary I'm going to put out there. And some people are going to like that, some people aren't. That's not my problem anymore because I can set the boundary. When we live in toleration zone, we feel like we are the ones who have to kind of, be the better person and kind of like, oh, but I can't offend this person because whatever. No, just go back to set a boundary and then, boundary is really that filter to be like, who's going to pass it and who's not. And you don't have to be angry about it. You don't have to be all grumpy about when they choose out, or you don't have to be like, oh, well, this is what I'm doing now, so you can't. Like, there's a lot of ways people will approach it, but just be like, hey, this is who I am and how I want to show up. And people are either going to say yes or no, and that's okay, right? As we set boundaries, as we hold to them, we're going to find that some people in our lives disappear, and that's okay. You're not a bad person. But I promise you, when we can set boundaries, we can live in the boundary space and not in the toleration zone, we'll have way more freedom than we ever had before. Okay? So I really want to hear about boundaries and what you guys feel. Also post in the comments below, right? Below the video. Like what is it that you want to work on? Be brave, share. Because I'd like to help you out through this. Boundaries is one subject, especially around money, right? But we have to look at that relationship with other people is a better place to start. But let's start with the boundaries. Be like, where are you now? Where do you want to go? What's that toleration zone? And share it below. Be brave. Because again, boundaries, I love the subject of boundaries, and there's so many different aspects of it. This toleration zone is like one small conversation about what boundaries really can be. They'd be really powerful, like I said. When you set more boundaries in your life, They feel constrictive, but it really provides more freedom for you. So let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you're thinking, what you need help with around boundaries, and let's have a conversation. Until next week, we'll see you. Bye.